Hi, everybody. Good morning. Shavua Tov. This is Eve Harrow on Rejuvenation for the Land of Israel Network. It is a beautiful Sunday, June 24th, 2018, the 11th day of Tammuz, 5778, a beautiful day in Yerushalayim. And I'm sitting in the home, I love how unpretentious Israelis are. I'm sitting in the home of, I think, one of the preeminent archaeologists that we have in Israel, and specifically in Jerusalem, Gabi Barkay. For those of you who are familiar with the beautiful silver amulets with a version of the priestly blessing that were found in a place called Ketef Chinom from the First Temple period, that would be Gabi Barkay's digs. And he has just done so much to add to our knowledge of Israel and specifically of Jerusalem in the work that he has done over the quite a few decades. But unfortunately, I'm sitting with him now in his capacity as the co-director with Tzachi Dvira of the Temple Mount Sifting Project, and the Temple Mount has been in the news in the last few days. And as an archaeologist, and as those of us who care about history and about things not being destroyed, we're very unhappy with some of the things that have happened. And Gabi Barkay was very, very charming and said, come and I'll speak to you as a professional about what's happening on Har HaBayit, on Temple Mount. So maybe we'll back up for a minute for those of my listeners who don't know. What is the Temple Mount Sifting Project, and why did that need to be started about, 15 years ago or so?
Temple Mount, first of all, is the soul, heart, and spirit of the Jewish people. Temple Mount is sacred to Christians. It appears over 20 times in the New Testament. It was the focus of activities of Jesus in Jerusalem, and it is a sacred site for Muslims as well. The Temple Mount occupies about 1/6 of the total area of the old city of Jerusalem, and it was in antiquity the largest religious compound of the ancient world. Now, the Temple Mount enjoyed a certain status quo of existence of two major buildings of the Muslims, the Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque, for centuries. Those buildings were built under the Umayyad dynasty in the late 7th and 8th centuries of the Common Era. The situation changed drastically in the 1990s when, following political developments, the Islamic Waqf, or the religious trust that runs daily matters upon the Temple Mount, changed the status quo. And since the 90s, there are 4 major structures instead of 2. There is a gigantic mosque inaugurated in 1996, which was built into a pre-existing ancient structure known as Solomon's Stables in the southeastern corner of Temple Mount. In addition, there is another mosque which was built into a Second Temple period space underneath the Al-Aqsa Mosque that is known today by the name of the Ancient Aqsa. In 1999, a barbarous act took place when allegedly for an emergency exit for the illicitly built mosque of Solomon's Stables, a gigantic pit was dug by bulldozers in the southeastern corner of the Temple Mount. That pit, which was 12 meters in depth and 40 meters in length, was dug with heavy machinery without any archaeological supervision. The place was messed up, and approximately 400 truckloads with over 9,000 tons of earth were removed from there, and that earth was saturated with the history of the Temple Mount. One should mention also that Temple Mount has never, ever been excavated, and every bit of information from the Temple Mount is of utmost importance to establish the history of the Temple Mount, which is one of the focal points of Western civilization. The earth from that pit was dumped into the Kidron Valley, and for the last 14 years we were busy with sifting through that soil, which was illicitly removed, barbarically removed from the Temple Mount. Within that soil we discovered over 500,000 finds, ranging mainly from First Temple period up to modern times.
So I have taken tourists, and I've gone with my own family to the Temple Mount Sifting. It's an unbelievable experience to take a bucket and you wash through the dirt under supervision of archaeologists, and you find bones from sacrifices and coins and arrowheads and evidence of the tremendous human activity on the mount, and pieces of the temple, the flooring of the temple, something that Gabi Barkay was very much a part of, along with someone I know, Frankie Snyder, and putting that together and actually being able to recreate the beautiful floors of Herod's temple. But with that comes a great deal of grief that we have access because of this travesty that was done and things that were just dumped into the garbage. And I know that already then there were tremendous absurdities where I believe Tzachi Dvira was following the garbage. So not the garbage, the fill from the Temple Mount that was put into literally the garbage dump, finds antiquities and takes them to, I believe, to court in Jerusalem to prove, look what's happening. And they wanted to arrest him for stealing antiquities. What is going on here in terms of the police, the Israeli government? Who is in charge of the Temple Mount? How can this be allowed to happen?
The Temple Mount is part of Jerusalem, and Jerusalem is the capital of the state of Israel. So the Temple Mount falls under the sovereignty of the state of Israel. And according to the law of antiquities, every such activity that takes place in a declared archaeological site should be done with proper archaeological supervision. That was not done. In Israel, since the reunification of Jerusalem following the Six-Day War, the matters of the Temple Mount are in the hands of the Prime Minister. Prime Minister in 1999, when this atrocity took place, was Ehud Barak, and he approved the request of the Waqf for that emergency exit. So this is something for which the Israeli government has to be blamed. The director of antiquities of those days, the head of the Antiquities Authority, the late Amir Dori, declared then that it was an archaeological crime.
And a group of archaeologists, yourself at the head, you created this organization now to try and keep this from happening again?
In the year 2000, following these atrocities, a non-sectarian public committee was established in order to prevent further destruction of antiquities upon the Temple Mount. Unfortunately, that body, which I hoped will not be needed anymore, is active until this very day.
So to come to the present, under cover of the last few days of Ramadan last week, Eid al-Fitr, the 3-day holiday, Israel kind of didn't let non-Muslims up on the Temple Mount to give them space for their prayers and for their worship and for their holiday. And apparently, we know from cameras, they used that to further destroy some of the antiquities on the Mount, which is why I'm sitting in your living room today. So what exactly happened in the last few days?
In the eastern part of Temple Mount, large amount of soil in several large piles still exists. the Supreme Court prohibited the removal of that earth and the touching of that earth without archaeological supervision and without checking it archaeologically previous to any removal. What happened is that the many thousands of visitors to the Temple Mount during the Ramadan were used up by the Waqf authorities for a catch. And they started building seats and benches out of the stones that were uprooted from these piles, and some flattening of the piles also took place. They dug into some of these piles. That is against the ruling of the Supreme Court. And the police put up an observation point next to these piles in order to supervise what goes on. And allegedly the subject was brought up in the last meeting last week of the King of Jordan, King Abdullah, who regards himself as an authority over the Islamic Waqf of the Temple Mount, and Prime Minister Netanyahu. The work actually stopped. It was on a small scale. The damage is rather limited.
So beyond the more limited scope of the damage this time than, as you said, there was in 1999, there's a bigger picture here that I know that you and I understand, living here in the Middle East. I'm not sure that those in the West understand. And that is the one of getting away with something, and it's much bigger than just a small crime. There is a need or an intent on the part, it seems, of Muslims to somewhat, I would even say, spit in the eye of Jews and of Christians, to be able to do what they want on the Temple Mount, and thereby it becomes just their sacred space. It's not a place that's holy to all of us.
You are perfectly right. This was an attempt to show who is the boss. It was an attempt to despise the ruling of the Supreme Court and to say, we, the Waqf, we, the Muslims, we are going to do whatever we like, and we do not care about what you say. This was an attempt to have a catch, to use the opportunity of the Ramadan and to use the opportunity that thousands of Muslim visitors and worshippers are on top of the mountain in order to break the law.
So the rest of us who live under Israeli law can't do something like this. When any of us build a home in Israel and we come across antiquities, we have to, at our own expense, have some kind of salvage dig. We have to call on the Israel Antiquities Authority. And it's understood that the antiquities in this land where humanity has lived for thousands and thousands of years belongs to everybody. But when they get away with it here, because, look, people can try and break laws all the time, run red lights, do whatever it is they want. When you live in a law-abiding society, it's up to then the authorities to make sure you don't get away with it. Otherwise, you have complete chaos and anarchy. Why isn't the Israeli government stepping in here and saying flat out, you cannot do this?
You have to remember that there are people who warn us that the Temple Mount will be the starting point of the Third World War. The place is very sensitive politically, and that is the reason. That is the reason, and there is international involvement. There is involvement of the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan, who regard themselves as guardians of the Islamic holy places, though they have no presence here, but the salaries of the Waqf are officially paid by the Crown in Jordan. So it is an explosive political matter. And there are always people who whisper into the ears of politicians that this might do so and so, and this may cause those and those results. In any case, it is politics. In Jerusalem, whatever you do and whatever you don't do is political. Sneezing in Jerusalem is intensive political activity, because you can do it to the left, you can do it to the right. Whatever you do and whatever you don't do, everything is political. So politics here intervenes with archaeological matters as it intervenes with all other matters of our life in Jerusalem.
So for me, as just a simple Israeli, it's incredibly painful to see people getting away with this, and also to wonder what has now been destroyed that we can never get back. The fact that everything has been all churned up has already taken out of its layers of context, but who knows what has been stolen. I can only imagine, though, that you, as an archaeologist, as someone who has devoted really your entire life to the preservation, to the discovery, and then the preservation and the study of the archaeology of Jerusalem, and as an Israeli who's a law-abiding Israeli, you're in a different level here, I think, for most of us, and how this would make you feel.
One has to understand it in a broader context. The political developments in the Near East, which are the result of the swiping victory of Israel in the Six-Day War, the repercussions of that started late. And we have the so-called Arabic Spring, etc. The atrocities started with blowing up of the Buddha statues in Bamiyan in Afghanistan by the Taliban. It went on with the destruction of the Assyrian capitals. It went on with looting of archaeological museums in Baghdad. There was an attempt also in Cairo. There was an attempt in Tunis. And it ends with the destruction of the marvelous monuments of Palmyra in the Syrian desert, and the execution of the archaeologist who was in charge of these antiquities. One has to see the broader picture in order to understand there is an attempt to destroy any remains which are non-Muslim in the Near East, and the Temple Mount should fall into the same category. The subject is a very delicate subject. It is a very painful subject, and it is something that comes, the physical destruction comes also with an ideology which is connected to it. The temple denial, which started in the 90s, that the Jews never had any connection to Jerusalem, and there was never a temple upon the Temple Mount, and the change of name from the noble sanctuary of the Temple Mount, the Haram al-Sharif, which is now being forgotten slowly by the name Al-Aqsa for the entire compound. All those changes and the resolutions of UNESCO concerning the non-relevance of Jews in the history of the Temple Mount and of Jerusalem, all that has to be taken into consideration.
So what you're saying is that the moving of some dirt is part of a religious war of Islam against Judaism, Christianity, and anything that is not Islam.
It is cultural terrorism, and beyond any doubt, one has to add it to the acts of war, to the stabbings, to the suicide bombings, and to all other atrocities which are carried out in the Near East.
Without necessarily giving names, As an archaeologist in your professional life, have you had occasion to speak with archaeologists from the Muslim world, from the Arab countries, about this? And are they torn? If so, are they torn at all between their professionalism and their curiosity and wanting to discover things from history, and this pull or maybe fear even from their society over what we're just talking about now?
I'll tell you, the Waqf authorities, they have a full-time archaeologist in Jerusalem, Dr. Yusuf Natche. The matter is a total misunderstood difference in the societies which exist in the Near East. We are not witnessing a free democratic society, and an archaeologist who knows all details wouldn't say that there was a temple of the Jews upon the Temple Mount, because he would come home shortened by one head if he says so, or perforated. This is not a free society in which everyone is granted with freedom of speech. This is a totally different type of society, and one has to recognize it.
That's why I was wondering if, at happy hour or something, anybody's ever said to you, off the record and without cameras and without names, that they wish it were different.
The answer is no. Yeah, I'm deadly afraid.
That is so sad. I mean, I'm sorry for them. I'm sorry for them. I'm happy for us. I know that here they were just as excited in Jerusalem to announce the finding of an Abbasid, a little amulet, a kamea, a little like a good luck charm or something that someone had written for Allah from about 1,000 years ago in the Givati dig near Jerusalem. We're just as excited to find anything from any time period, something from the Byzantine period, as we are from Jewish periods.
We, in the Sifting Project, which is run by Tzachi Dvira and myself for the last 14 years, we honor, we cherish the entire history of Jerusalem. Would it be pagans? Would it be Canaanites, pre-Israelites? Would it be the ancient Egyptians? Would it be the ancient Israelites or Judean monarchy? Would it be the Roman Empire or the Crusaders or the different Islamic dynasties who ruled Jerusalem? We honor the history of Jerusalem to a degree that all civilizations represented here are just the same for us.
So, since I've already have you here, can you just tell us from your illustrious career, what is the most exciting find that you had, or the moment that for you just stands out in your life as the wow?
I have no hesitations. There is no problem in that. The most touching and most interesting piece was the two tiny silver amulets that you mentioned, which include the earliest biblical verses that we own to date. Those are the words of the priestly benediction or the Aaronic blessing, which appear in the Bible in the book of Numbers, chapter 6. Those were found, and they belong to the 7th century BC, to some 2,600 years ago. And this is beyond any doubt a very important discovery, and I'm very proud of it.
Was there anything that you were looking for that you didn't find? Anything you had in your mind that, based on research, you thought, this tomb, or I don't know, something, a Roman theater, whatever it is, something that you didn't, in the end, it's yet out there to be discovered?
The peak of my dreams is to be able to dig upon the Temple Mount, but it would not materialize, unfortunately, neither in my own lifetime, neither in the lifetime of my grandchildren.
I'm going to hope that on that last sentence you're wrong. And I'm hoping that at one point the Israeli government will take control of the scene there, not be afraid. It just comes back to me all the time, back to my parenting, that when I let my kids get away with one tantrum, I was setting ourselves up for the next one. And that to be afraid to stop them now on the Mount is just going to embolden them to do even greater things, and that they're the sovereign and they're the real owners of the Temple Mount.
Unfortunately, our lives in this part of the world are controlled by politics, and we are all subjects to political decisions, unfortunately.
I would say that's like that in other parts of the world, but here everything is just so much more vivid and so much more intense.
It is true.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Gabi Barkay. It was truly an honor to sit with you this morning, and I wish it was a happier occasion, and maybe I would look forward to interviewing you if you did get a permit to dig on the Temple Mount, and that would be a sign of a new day.
Let's hope so. Thank you very much. The honor and privilege was mine.
Okay, everybody, I will be right back. Don't go away.
Somehow, Israel has found itself in the center of some of the most dramatic events of this administration. The embassy move to Jerusalem, the Iran deal, and now because of the hypocrisy and the anti-Israel bias, the United States has officially pulled out of the United Nations Human Rights Council. The world is changing fast. This week on Israel Inspired.
Israel Inspired with Ari Abramowitz and Jeremy Gimpel on the Land of Israel Network at thelandofisrael.com, sharing the truth and beauty of Israel with the world.
Hi, everybody. Eve again. Just wanted to wrap up today's show with a couple of words. Dr. I hope you enjoyed the interview with Gabi Barkay. He really has had an amazing career. He no longer digs. He's not as young as he once was, and it's hard work. But he does supervise, and he is busy. He told me he's got a staff of about 20 people now that are working hard to publish much of the work that he's done over the years. That's, it's one thing to dig, and then at some point also, obviously, you have to publish, and that's a whole other thing to do, and very difficult and time consuming. And he's got a lot of people helping him do that. And of course, he's still with Tzachi Dvira, who's the one who uncovered the travesty on the Temple Mount. He's still working with him on the Temple Mount Sifting. But he also said to me, because I told him that I had interviewed Scott Stripling from the Shiloh dig a couple of weeks ago, and he said that they came to his lab, the people from Shiloh came to his lab, and so he was able to see some of their finds, including I believe it was a scarab from Pharaoh Tutmos III, who was up here in around minus 1400 and something. And that was really an exciting find. So the archaeologists get very excited together. They work together and collaborate and share their finds on a completely different level, of course, than it's for most of us. And so he's still very, very involved with what is happening. And I wish it would be just so wonderful if his dream came true, and that one day he would be able to do a supervised dig on the Temple Mount. And we all have our dreams, and it would show a different reality, not just that he got a permit, but it would show that there is some kind of really Israel sovereignty on the Temple Mount. I would love to say that it would show that there was some kind of respect for everybody else on the side of the Muslims on the Temple Mount, but perhaps that is really a pipe dream that I'm not going to see in my lifetime either. Would that it were. It would be a better world for all of us, and especially for the Muslims. The rest of us are doing okay, and they're the ones who are falling off the globe. So wishing you all a wonderful week, a wonderful safe week, and here in Israel, an end to the kites and the condoms and all the other things coming over from Gaza, the ecological terrorism, if you will, that's burning the fields with an attempt to kill people in the Gaza envelope. And I certainly hope that that is going to end, and that and I want to end actually this week. I want to end this week's show with a prayer for wisdom for our leaders, for all our leaders around the world. For my leaders here in Israel in particular, yes, it is really a minefield. And as Dr. Barkay said a couple of times, nothing happens here without there being some kind of political ramifications. But kicking the can down the road doesn't usually work either. And it just leaves usually a worse situation for somebody else to handle. And so I would really hope that our leaders have the wisdom to understand that a small and painful price now perhaps is better than, and world censure or whatever it is better than a much bigger blow up down the line. And so that would be my prayer for this week for all of us. Have a great week, everybody. Wow, it is really, really a beautiful day in Jerusalem. Eve Harrow, Rejuvenation, Land of Israel Network. Thanks once again to Ben and to Tabitha and everybody at the network. If you're in Israel, I got to throw this in. I have a great trip to the Southern Hebron Hills planned for July 5th. Another trip to Shomron, to Samaria on July 26th. And my wine tour, August 22nd in the Shomron, in the area of Binyamin. So if you happen to be here, those are public trips that anybody can join, run by One Israel Fund, and you can go on their site and sign up for those trips. And I am putting the final touches on my next trip to the States in October, the end of October, beginning of November, still with a couple of open dates. So be in touch. I would, first of all, love to see you here. That's always my favorite. But worst comes to worst, I'm always delighted to share Israel with you wherever you are. So take care, everybody. Have a wonderful week. Goodbye for now.